Okay, can you please state your name?
My name is Harrison Cole.
Why did the war start?
Well, a lot of reasons for the war start. One of the reasons is because of the lack of nickel, like when you use for coins. South Vietnam area was a large supply of nickel. When it became a point that nickel was going to be, compromised, that's when the United States stepped in to protect our value of nickel. Mainly, the whole war was gauged on nickel.
How did you feel about the war?
I had mixed emotions for it. I thought we was in an area that we didn't really need to be in, but because my upbringing and my thoughts, the military said that I had to be there, the government said that I had to be there, and I went. There was never any question about me going where or when. I felt it was just my duty that, if I could do it. I enlisted prior to doing the draft because I was at the age where the draft was hitting most of my friends in school, and I decided, I wanted to do something else, so I enlisted in the military. And it was a short time after that that I ended up in Vietnam. In fact, I volunteered for Vietnam to go over there.
Why did you volunteer for Vietnam?
Excitement. I was seeing a lot of my friends, from the past coming back wounded or dead. And I figured, maybe I could make some small, minute little change or help somebody. That I'm just the type of person that would like to help somebody. And I figured if I could help somebody from being killed or died, I would sacrifice myself to do that.
What was it like when the soldiers came home from the war?
It was hard. We was not in the real war. The real war was like World War II or whatever. The Vietnam veteran was discouraged, shunned, insulted against, abused, or whatever, because it was a controversial war. They tacked names on us like baby killers, woman killers, or whatever. The Vietnam War was a whole different concept of war. The Japanese had it with their booby traps. Other wars have had different types of ways to hurt, American people, whatever. The Vietnam War was a whole different one. They used booby traps. They used babies. They used small children. They used women. They used anything that they could to get against the United States. What you see during the day, maybe somebody that works in the compound, military compound, making beds or cleaning whatever. At night they turn around, they're the North Vietnamese that are our enemy. So they would plant bombs, they would plant grenades and stuff like that within the complex so that, after hours they would go off. So you never trusted anybody over there that was a Vietnamese. I still have that problem today because I don't trust anybody with that type of look. It's just something that has been inbred after the 2.5 years that I was over there. You begin to realize that you can't trust anybody like that, so I have a hard time dealing with that. I spent 6 months down at Togus in Augusta for treatment from this because I tried to run over a guy one time because he was a Vietnamese. He was driving around in a brand new Mercedes car, and I figured, we paid for that. Well, we fought him over in Vietnam, and now we're fighting for him here because they're taking away a lot of our rights and a lot of our properties because they are entitled, according to some people, So I figured, that's why I ended up down in Togus for a while.
Wow. How did the war affect the world and the people?
The war and the people of this country, we was automatically claimed second best. Vietnam won, America came in second. Because we was not allowed to fight the war like other conventional means. This was a political war. A lot of times we'd be out on missions or we'd be out in foxholes or whatever. We didn't even have ammunition. If we wanted to, do something, we had to call back to headquarters to get the authorization to, send somebody out with ammunition. It was not a war that we could go over there and fight to win. It was a political war. It was politics, mainly the whole thing. And like again, it all came right down to, nickel and how they can, twist around and manipulate to make it sound like a war when it really wasn't a war. It was just a conflict. And the American people and the American soldiers and the American GIs are the one that took the brunt. They're the ones that was hurt by it.
How long did the war last exactly?
It started in about, I'm going to say 60, 61, 62, and lasted, I think the final ones came out of there around 1974. There was a lot of, it went over first as advisors, and like I say, the government can twist things around, and they got the support of Congress and the Senate to send armed troops over. And it kind of led, from one thing to another, and it developed into a conflict. Not a war, a conflict. A war is when you fight with both sides, fighting. This is a war where you fight basically one side. They was fighting against us. If we was attacked, we was able to fire back. But for us to go over there, we had enough people in Vietnam at one time that we could have, walked hand in hand from one end of Vietnam to the north end of Vietnam and chased everybody out. But we was never allowed to do that.
Oh, why do you believe it lasted that long?
Politics again. A lot of the presidents just, wanted to, get us out of there. It was costing the United States millions and billions and billions of dollars. It's still costing the United States millions and millions of dollars because we're going over there and we're supporting the Vietnam. We're rebuilding Vietnam. A lot of the GIs that was injured in there, myself included, are under disability, so the government is paying for that. It's still a conflict. We're still regarded as second-class citizens. It's just within the last couple of years, people have walked up to me, especially when I wear a hat saying, I'm a Vietnam veteran, they've walked up to me and said, thank you for your service. This is something that should have happened. I left there in August 68. When I came home, we was, on a military base, and we was thrown rotten apples, tomatoes, and cabbage, through the fence at us because we was unliked, we was unpopular. We was in an area that, people just didn't think we should have been in. But rather than, being a disgrace to the United States military and to my family, I would have gone. I would go tomorrow if the same thing happened again. It's just one of those things.
Did you expect the people to react that way when you guys got home?
No. We expected we'd come home. Like in World War II, when they come home, they had big ticker tape parades, in New York. There was honor, there was parties, the whole 9 yards. We came home and we was ignored. Someone said we're a Vietnam veteran. They says, oh, baby slayer, woman killer, drunk, drug addict. There's all kinds of different names that they tacked on to the Vietnam veteran. Yes, there were some instances perhaps of that, but it didn't include all of the Vietnam veterans. When I was over there, I never had a problem with alcohol, drugs, or any of this type of stuff. I mean, it was just, I was in the military. I didn't feel it was something that was needed. Some of the people, that was the way they dealt with the pressures and stuff over there. I mean, one minute you could be sitting down somewhere, and the next minute, it could be blown up, with satchel charges and whatever. The same thing has happened right now in Iran and Iraq, with driving alongside the road and they have these unmanned bombs that explode. So you never know, from one minute to another, what's going to happen. So there is a pressure. Nowadays they call it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and there's a lot of people that have that. It doesn't have to necessarily be from a combat situation. It can be from anything, a bad accident or whatever. It's still there. It's just something that's traumatic and you try to hide it. I myself usually don't say too much or do too much about it because I don't want to be singled out, because you kind of hide it. Some of us Vietnam veterans will walk around with uniforms, old uniforms, military jackets, whatever, the beards. They're looking for sympathy, and they're not going to get it. I don't. have never shown anything like that. I don't dress up like a military Vietnam veteran or whatever, because I just don't want to associate with that type of stuff. You know, I want to try to forget what I can forget out of it.
Did you plan on joining the military at all before your friends started joining?
When I got ready to graduate from high school, this is up in northern Maine, there really wasn't anything up there. You could work in a potato field, you could work in, you know, a gas station, you could work at McDonald's, so there really wasn't anything to offer. I figured there's got to be something better, so that's when I enlisted in the military. I'm glad I did, because for the simple reason it gave me a chance to visit all kinds of countries that you read about in the National Geographic magazine. It gave me a skill, it gave me money in my pocket, it gave me a food, it gave me a place to sleep. I was taken care of. And I think for young people nowadays, it's still one of the best things that they could be offered to them, because it gives them a sense of direction and a sense of responsibility. So yes, I think it was, to me, it was extremely beneficial. You know, I learned a lot and I grew up while I was doing it at a young age. Although I did miss my young teenage years, where everybody was out having parties and doing things like that. I was in the military. So I missed that block of time that is critical to a person's upbringing or whatever. But you get through it, you know, in time.
How long were you in the military?
I was in there for a total, I was going for 20 years, going for the retirement. I made it to 12 and a half years. And because of injuries in Vietnam and stuff like that, I couldn't pass the physicals or whatever, so I was released from the military.
All right, well, thank you for the interview.